What if I told you that long before Tesla, before the electric car craze, and before Elon Musk became a household name, a quiet farm kid in the middle of nowhere built his own solar-powered car? No investors, no billion-dollar company, no flashy Silicon Valley launch, just raw determination, a pile of scrap parts, and an idea that seemed impossible for his time. Picture this: the wide-open fields of rural America in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Rows of corn swaying in the breeze, rusty barns standing against the wind, and a young boy who spent most of his time tinkering with machines instead of chasing the usual childhood distractions. While other kids his age were dreaming of sports cars, he was busy sketching designs for vehicles that didn't need a single drop of gasoline. His family thought it was just another farm kid daydream, but he was quietly building something extraordinary. At a time when gas prices were spiking, when environmental concerns were just beginning to surface, and when the idea of solar panels powering anything larger than a calculator sounded ridiculous, this kid dared to believe otherwise. He scrounged through junkyards, salvaged broken appliances, and pieced together an invention that was so far ahead of its time that most people simply shrugged it off. But looking back today, it feels almost prophetic-like, a glimpse of the future that nobody cared to notice. And here's the thought that lingers. What if this young farm kid had been given the same spotlight, the same resources, or the same opportunities as the tech giants we know today? Would history have looked different? Would the race toward clean energy have started decades earlier? These questions alone spark endless debate. And I'd love to hear what you think as we unravel this forgotten story. Because tonight, we're not just talking about Elon Musk or Tesla. We're going back to where it all began. In the dusty fields of a small farm where a boy no one had heard of quietly built a solar car that could have changed everything. Growing up on a farm meant that this boy's life was tied to machines. Tractors, combines, and trucks weren't just tools, they were the heartbeat of survival. But machines also broke down, and when they did, money to repair them was scarce. That's where his curiosity began. Instead of tossing broken parts aside, he pulled them apart, studied how they worked, and figured out ways to put them back together. It was as if every bolt, wire, and motor whispered a secret to him, teaching him lessons no classroom ever could. By the time he was in his early teens, he had already earned a reputation in his small town as the kid who could fix anything. Old radios, lawnmowers, even neighbors' cars found their way into his makeshift workshop, a dusty corner of the family barn, filled with tools that had seen better days. But what set him apart wasn't just the repairs. It was the way he constantly asked himself, what if? What if a motor didn't need gas? What if a machine could run forever, powered only by the sun? Most adults laughed off these questions. After all, the energy crisis of the 70s was seen as temporary. And renewable energy was something politicians talked about, but farmers rarely cared for. To them, solar power was a gimmick. But to this kid, it was a challenge. He had read about solar panels in magazines, had seen tiny ones powering calculators, and thought, if it can power that, why can't it power something bigger? So he started experimenting, using whatever scraps he could find, dull bicycle wheels, car batteries that had been tossed aside, and a handful of small solar cells. He began building crude models. The first ones barely moved. They sputtered, they failed, and sometimes they didn't move at all. But failure never discouraged him. If anything, it fueled him. Every mistake was just another step closer to getting it right. And it's here that the story takes an incredible turn. Because while most kids his age were saving up for their first car or dreaming about leaving the farm, he was about to build something that even adults, twice his age, would struggle to imagine. A fully functional solar-powered vehicle. The breakthrough came slowly, piece by piece. He wasn't building in a sleek garage or a high-tech lab. He was building in a barn, surrounded by hay, rust, and the constant hum of farm life. Every component he used had a story. The frame came from an old go-kart that had been abandoned behind a shed. The wheels were salvaged from a wrecked lawn tractor. The wiring came from radios and broken appliances. And the batteries, heavy, awkward, barely holding a charge, were pulled out of scrapped cars at the junkyard. What tied all of these parts together was his relentless imagination. He had no engineering degree, no formal training, and certainly no blueprint for how to build a solar car. All he had were his hands, his persistence, and a small stack of articles clipped from magazines that hinted at what solar power might one day become. Using these as his guide, he carefully arranged his solar panels, testing their limits under the summer sun. At first, the panels could barely generate enough electricity to light a bulb. But he experimented with angles, rewired the circuits, and slowly learned how to squeeze every drop of energy out of them. Then came the challenge of storing that energy. He needed the car to move, even when the sun wasn't blazing overhead. That's where the recycled car batteries came in, acting as primitive storage units for the power he managed to capture. Day after day, the project grew. The little frame in the barn began to take shape into something resembling a vehicle. It was rough, awkward, and nothing close to what you'd see on a showroom floor. But it was his. Every nut and bolt represented hours of trial, error, and relentless determination. And then after months of tinkering, it happened. The solar panels charged the batteries, the wiring held together, and when he flipped the switch, the wheels began to turn. The machine rolled forward under its own power, fueled entirely by the sun. For a moment, standing in that dusty barn, the world changed. He had built something no one thought possible, a solar-powered car, born not in a lab, but on a farm. But here's the part that still stings: no reporters showed up. No engineers came to marvel at it. No companies offered him a deal. To most people around him, it was just another farm kid's hobby project. Yet in reality, he had created something that foreshadowed the future we're living in right now. Word about the strange contraption spread slowly through the small farming community. Neighbors stopped by, curious to see what the boy had been working on so tirelessly. At first, most of them chuckled. A car powered by the sun? To many, it sounded more like science fiction than farmyard reality. Some patted him on the back politely, while others outright dismissed it as nothing more than a toy. But then he drove it across the dusty gravel road outside his family's barn, and the laughter turned into silence. The machine moved steadily, humming quietly, with no smoke, no exhaust, and no gasoline smell. The adults didn't know what to make of it. Here was a boy who had taken scraps of junk and turned them into something that shouldn't even exist in their world of diesel trucks and gas-guzzling tractors. And yet, he had proved it was possible. For him, that drive wasn't just a test run, it was a declaration. A statement that technology didn't have to come from big cities or corporate labs. It could be born in the mind of a kid with nothing more than determination and curiosity. But acceptance didn't come easily. This was the early 1980s, long before electric vehicles were taken seriously. Oil companies dominated the headlines. Car manufacturers were obsessed with horsepower, and the idea of renewable energy was still seen as a fragile dream. So instead of recognition, he often met skepticism. Some neighbors warned him it was a waste of time. A few even mocked him, asking why anyone would ever want a car that ran slower than a tractor. Still, there were moments of encouragement. A local teacher admired his persistence and told him he was thinking decades ahead. A few friends cheered him on, marveling at how the machine actually worked. And deep down, the boy knew he was touching the edge of something bigger than himself. Every time the solar panels absorbed the sun's energy and converted it into motion, he felt a sense of pride that no amount of doubt could take away. It raises a question worth asking even today. How many brilliant ideas are overlooked simply because they don't come from the right place or the right person? How many inventions are born in barns, basements, or garages only to vanish because no one believed in them at the time? That's exactly what happened here. The farm kid's solar car could have been the spark that changed everything, but the world wasn't ready to listen. As the years went by, the boy's invention became more than just a project. It became a symbol of his imagination. He fine-tuned the car whenever he had the chance, adjusting the wiring, adding stronger batteries when he could find them, and experimenting with different placements of the solar panels to capture more sunlight. Each improvement made it a little faster, a little stronger, and a little more reliable. But despite the progress, recognition remained out of reach. There were no viral videos to spread his achievement, no social media posts to showcase his creation. The only audience he had was the handful of neighbors and family members who witnessed the car rolling along the gravel roads. And in the wider world, technology was racing in a different direction. Automakers were building bigger engines, faster cars, and paying little attention to renewable energy. His invention, though remarkable, was left sitting in the shadows. Yet, that didn't stop him. Even without applause, he kept working. He read every article he could find about solar energy, cutting out clippings from newspapers and magazines. He scribbled down designs in his notebooks late at night, dreaming of one day building a vehicle that could rival the gas-powered machines that roared through his small town. Deep inside, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing a belief. A belief that the sun, shining freely above everyone, could one day power the future of transportation. But life on a farm is demanding. As he grew older, responsibilities piled up. Fields had to be plowed, crops had to be harvested, and bills had to be paid. The dream that once consumed his childhood started to fade into the background. His solar car remained in the barn, a dusty reminder of what he had accomplished and what might have been. And this is where the story takes a bittersweet turn. While he labored on the farm, trying to keep up with the challenges of daily life, others around the world began experimenting with the same ideas. Universities held solar car races, tech companies started dabbling with electric prototypes, and eventually, decades later, names like Elon Musk would rise to the front pages, celebrated as pioneers of the clean energy revolution. But here's the irony. Long before the Teslas and the headlines, a farm kid had already driven the future, quietly unnoticed and forgotten by history. By the time the world finally started paying attention to renewable energy, the farm kid was no longer a kid. He had grown into adulthood, carrying with him the memory of that solar car and the feeling of having touched the future before anyone else believed in it. The same barn that once echoed with the sound of his experiments now stood as a silent witness, filled with tools that had gone rusty and parts that had been left behind. Meanwhile, across the globe, solar technology was advancing. Governments began funding research, universities were building experimental solar race cars, and eventually, entrepreneurs like Elon Musk would take the idea of electric vehicles and turn it into a multi-billion-dollar industry. For many, Tesla was the birth of the electric revolution. But for him, it was a reminder that he had seen the future decades earlier, only without the recognition or support to take it further. The contrast couldn't be sharper. Musk had investors, cutting-edge labs, and a stage to unveil his ideas to the world. The farm kid had nothing but his determination and a pile of salvaged parts. Musk was hailed as a visionary. The boy was barely remembered, and yet the essence of their work was the same. Both saw that cars didn't have to run on gas. Both believed the sun could power the future, and both took the first steps toward proving it. It is easy to imagine how different things might have been if his invention had reached the right hands at the right time. Imagine if a journalist had told his story. Imagine if an engineer had offered to mentor him, or a company had invested in his idea. Would the clean energy movement have started years earlier? Would we already be living in a world where solar-powered cars are the norm instead of the exception? These what-ifs make his story more than just history. They make it a mirror that forces us to think about the ideas around us today, the ones we dismiss because they come from unexpected places. After all, genius doesn't always wear a suit or work in a lab. Sometimes, it's just a kid in a barn, trying to build something no one else believes in. Looking back now, the story of that farm kid feels like a forgotten chapter in the history of innovation. His solar car may not have been sleek, fast, or marquetretti, but it carried within it the same spark that fuels every great invention, the courage to imagine something different. And while his community eventually moved on, the car itself stood as a quiet symbol of what determination and creativity can achieve, even without resources or recognition. What makes this story so powerful is how ordinary it was. He wasn't surrounded by a team of scientists or engineers. There were no investors, no glossy presentations, no cheering crowds, just a boy, the sun, and a dream. And maybe that's why it's so easy to overlook stories like his. We live in a world that celebrates the finished product, the shiny new car on the showroom floor, but often forgets the lonely beginnings, the nights of frustration, and the countless failures that come before success. But here's the truth. History is full of people like him, innovators who worked in silence, who built things years ahead of their time, only to watch others take the spotlight later. And yet without them, progress would never have been possible. Every bold step forward rests on the shoulders of those who dared to try when no one else believed. Think about it. How many kids right now are sitting in garages, barns, or basements, quietly working on something the world doesn't understand yet? How many of their ideas will be dismissed as toys or hobbies until, decades later, when someone else brings the same vision to life on a global stage? It's a reminder to never underestimate where brilliance can come from. For the farm kid, the dream of solar power may not have made him famous, but it shaped who he was. It proved to him and to anyone who cared to notice that the future dosanti always start in boardrooms or laboratories. Sometimes, it begins in the hands of a child who refuses to accept the limits of his world. As time went on, the farm kid's invention faded into memory, but its meaning only grew stronger. What he built wasn't just a carrot, it was proof that vision can come from anywhere. In a way, his story isn't about what he didn't achieve, but about what he showed was possible long before the rest of the world caught up. His solar car may have been rough, clunky, and built from scraps, but it carried an idea that would later define an entire era of technology: clean, sustainable energy. Decades later, when Tesla cars began rolling off production lines and solar energy became a serious contender in the global energy market, people celebrated it as a new beginning. But if you trace the thread of history, you find it leads back to places like that barn, where an unknown farm kid dared to imagine the impossible. His work may not have been polished or profitable, but it was real. And sometimes, being first isn't about winning it, about planting a seed that will grow long after you've gone. The question we're left with is haunting. How many other farm kids, garage tinkerers, or overlooked dreamers have built things that could have changed the world if only someone had noticed? Innovation isn't always about who gets the credit. It's about who had the courage to try when the world wasn't ready. And in that sense, this forgotten boy stands right alongside the great visionaries of our time. His story asks us to think differently, to look closer at the quiet inventors around us, to wonder if the next big breakthrough won't come from a billionaire's stage presentation, but from a dusty barn, a cluttered workshop, or a child's imagination. Because history has shown us, again and again, that the future often starts in the most unexpected places. And maybe, just maybe, if we listened more carefully, we wouldn't miss the next farm kid who builds tomorrow's revolution before the rest of the world is ready to believe. So here we are, at the end of a story most people have never heard: a story about a farm kid who built a solar car before Elon Musk, before Tesla, before the world even believed it was possible. His invention didn't make headlines, it didn't earn him fame or fortune, and it didn't change the automotive industry overnight. But it proved something far more important: that big ideas can come from the smallest places, and that innovation doesn't wait for permission. The dusty barn where his dream came alive may be quiet now, but its legacy lives on every time we see a solar panel glinting in the sun, or an electric car gliding silently down the road. He may not be remembered as a pioneer, but his work belongs to the same story: the human story of daring to look at the impossible and asking, what if? And that's why his journey matters. It reminds us that history isn't just written by those in boardrooms or on magazine covers. It's also written by the dreamers no one notices, the kids who see the world differently, the tinkerers who refuse to give up, the visionaries who plant seeds for a future they may never get to see. So, the next time you see a Tesla or hear about the future of clean energy, think about the boy on that farm. Think about the quiet drive he took across the gravel road, powered only by sunlight and determination. Because in that moment, long before the world was ready, the future had already arrived.